So he is a tennis player, and he's won the Australian Open 9 times, a record 9 times. And this year he was hoping to go back to defend his title, because I think he also won last year. And amid all this COVID nonsense that's been going on, he has in the past said, come out and apparently said that he is anti-vaccine at the very least for himself. I don't know if he was saying as a full policy or whatever. All that I've seen reported is that he said, quote unquote, he said he was anti-vaccine, back in June 2020 or whenever this was. I don't know that there even were any vaccines at that point yet. I think they were still in development, but so that could have an impact on somebody's opinion of whether a vaccine is good or not. If it's not even fully in existence and
Right.
hasn't been tested and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, aside from that, so he has not gotten the vaccine, and Australia has a policy for any non-Australians coming into Australia right now. You have to be vaccinated against COVID-19. And because he is not, he had to fit under one of their exemptions. And they don't have very big exemptions in Australia. They're quite strict. He was told by the Tennis Australia chief medical officer and the Victorian government independent expert panel. He was told by them that he was approved as an exemption on the basis that he had just gotten and recovered from the bug. So it was like back in December, I think December 19th or something. So it's within the 90 days that seems to be generally accepted by the CDC and others.
He was there within 2 weeks of recovering. So, I mean, they're all the signs. And by the way, I mean, this is something that, and I'm going to cover this on, I'm going to read the whole judgment on my channel later today. But the Australian government essentially said about this point, they said there is no science that shows that recovering from the beer bug provides any protection whatsoever. And that to me was one of the biggest things where I was like, really? You're really going to go there? So that was one of the biggest things that in terms of the science things that we're talking about here, that's like, I think there's, I don't know, basic immunology 101. Not a doctor here, but just saying, I think there's some studies out there. I'm going to pull a couple of them when it comes to my channel, because we've got stuff even on Omicron already on this.
Yeah. So reportedly he was relying on this under approval by Tennis Australia's chief medical officer and the Victorian government independent expert panel. And he was under the impression that everything was a-okay, that his visa would be approved for his entry into Australia so that he can compete in the Australian Open, where the top prize is, I believe, about $3 million. So this is a substantial point of income for him. And he's not just a throwaway candidate, right? Like, he's kind of favored to win it, actually. So, so he arrived late at night on January 5th in Melbourne. A delegate of the Home Affairs Minister canceled his visa after it was determined that his exemption was not valid under Australia's Biosecurity Act, because his previous infection was not considered a medical contraindication for the vaccine in Australia. So apparently they said, and I'm reading from my notes here, they said that a medical contraindication, quote unquote, is a term. It's granted in specific situations where a drug, a procedure, vaccine, or surgery should not be used because it may be harmful to a person's health. So for example, some people have medical reasons for not getting the vaccine because they have a higher risk of blood clots. That's been a reason, for example, and other reasons. So his visa was then canceled under the Migration Act, which allows for the cancellation of a visa where the holder poses a risk to the health, safety, or good order of the Australian community or to an individual within the Australian community. So that was the reason why it was canceled. He fought it. And then on January 10th, a federal circuit court judge restored his visa and said it was unreasonable for the Australian Border Force to renege on the deal and to give him more time at the airport to contact his legal team. So then on the 14th, this is last Friday, Australian Immigration Minister Alex Hawke, he exercised his personal power to cancel the visa on the basis that Djokovic's presence in Australia might risk, quote, civil unrest, unquote. And he's a supposedly a quote unquote talisman of anti-vaccination sentiment. So it wasn't so much of a medical reason; it's more of a political reason from what it sounds like.
The federal court, so the ultimate thing was the federal court. So that was what the minister said, and the federal court went through and affirmed that.
Yes.
So, and
that was the most recent
that the court gave, like I said, it blows my mind that the court wrote these words. That the literal reason why they're really focused on this, the real problem, is not the health and safety. It's the good order. There's a good order clause, and they literally think that he will encourage people to be anti-juice. And that's the real reason why they don't want to let this happen.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna defend Australia on this one. My basis for doing so is I believe in borders. I believe in nations' borders. I believe in a nation's right to protect their borders. I think that every nation has the right to protect their borders and control who does or does not come into their territory under any terms that that they wish. Really, now whether or not the finer internal points of Australian law about the ability of the health minister to contraindicate the federal judges or not, I can't speak to that aspect because I can't speak to the ability of that legal determination in terms of the internal aspect. So I'll just speak to it externally. As far as I'm concerned, and there's case law on point, a nation can refuse someone for what they're going to say. The United States has done it. We have refused people's visas to come into the United States because they are intending to go to particular protests, even though those protests are legal within the United States. We have the sovereign right to exclude them from coming into our territory, even though if they were here, they could engage in the protest. So I'm just going to defend it from a principle of a nation has the right to protect its borders.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. And I talk about that all the time. It's that with immigration law, there's no immigration law. It's whatever their discretion is. I mean, they always give themselves out to refuse somebody, to throw somebody out, like Kurt said, for whatever reason, just because they don't like what they say, right? You have no right unless you're a permanent resident or a citizen. You haven't gotten those rights, whether it's in the United States through the Constitution or whatever other flim-flam documents you have. As we've seen, Australia, New Zealand, a lot of these countries, the documents aren't worth the paper they're written on. Canada, not worth the paper they're written on. But what we can do is we can, number one, vocalize our distaste for this on an international scale.
Sure.
And number two, for me, look, I'm here in Korea. Australian products are everywhere. I'm not buying a single Australian product, pretty much until they stop this craziness. I mean, I'm not going to support monetarily, economically at all anything that's going on that prison island. I've helped more people escape that island than I know that are still on that island. And I know I have viewers in Australia that are like, "Hey, I'm in the bush. I'm out by Perth.
Yeah.
I'm not even bothered by this." I'm like, "That's cool. Nothing against you, bro, but I'm not supporting your government and supplying them with tax revenues by me purchasing Australian beef here. I'll buy Japanese beef. I don't care if it's 2 times.
Now, so this is again where an issue of nuance comes into play, because I was talking about the ability to talk about what comes into your borders. Now, if we're going to switch the subject to how Australia is treating its own citizens and their mandates and the camps and things like that, that's a different legal analysis and the importance of nuance in these discussions, right?
Yep.
So we can have issues about how Australia is rounding people up or refusing to let them leave their homes. Or we can even talk about it from a health policy perspective of how these policies don't even make logical sense versus legal sense is a whole nother set of propositions. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and as you're quite right, we have every basis to say, well, this policy doesn't make sense. It's illogical. It's definitionally unreasonable. It's unreasoned. And here's the better reasons that this policy doesn't work as a matter of flow. So there's any number of avenues of attack, but I'm gonna go with the one of the fundamental aspects of what makes a country. Baseline definitions. What is a country 101? A country 101 is you have a territory, a permanent population, and the ability to control your territory and the ability to control your borders.
So Kurt,
like if you don't have that, you're not a country. So yeah, the Australia can protect its borders, and I can say they're stupid. That's fine.